She was the empress chosen by the emperor through a lottery. On her wedding day, her brothers laughed as they sent her off, saying, "Farewell forever! We'll collect your corpse for you." Hill made an international gesture of friendship to her fake family and got into the carriage without looking back. She pounded the carriage wall and threw a tantrum. "I'm not dead yet. This is a wedding, not a funeral." But deep down, she knew she was about to die. During the time she was waiting to be married, Hill heard many things about the emperor, mostly about his killing sprees. And the people of the empire were actually placing bets on how many days this empress would survive. Just as Hill was lost in her chaotic thoughts, the carriage stopped. She looked in disbelief at the magnificent and towering palace before her, and the red carpet covering the steps. Everything was just like in fairy tales, but Hill's face showed no excitement or joy. She thought grimly, "What a luxurious way to go to my death. The emperor is really giving me face." At that moment, a palace maid urged anxiously, "His Majesty is waiting for you, please get off the carriage quickly." But Hill turned a deaf ear, thinking, "Since I'm going to die anyway, why shouldn't I make a scene before I die?" She shouted aggressively, "I won't." The palace maid looked at Hill in shock. "What?" She darkened her face and said firmly again, "Whether I do this or that, it's death either way, so let me be wild once before I die." Then Hill raised her head and showed a brilliant smile. "If His Imperial Majesty doesn't come to pick me up personally, I won't move a single step." After that, she lowered her head to play with the bouquet in her hands, treating the palace maid's contemptuous discussions as background noise. But what the palace maids didn't know was that Hill was already regretting it. She looked like she was calmly picking at flowers, but she was actually divining whether her head would fall to the left or right later. She was waiting for the approaching death. 20 years of memories flashed through her mind like a revolving lantern. She remembered that since childhood she had wanted to do something crazy, like wandering around in winter clothes during blazing summer, messing up all the direction signs, or preparing dozens of different foods, taking one bite of each and then throwing them all away. But this didn't include risking her life to speak wildly to the emperor at a wedding. However, Hill didn't regret it. If she were to live as everyone expected, marrying a man she didn't like and spending nights with him, living each day watching her husband's moods, then dying unnoticed one day and being hastily buried, such a life would be as miserable as her mother's. Hill had decided she wouldn't live that kind of life. Rather than living in fear and uncertainty, it was better to make a spectacular scene before dying. At the palace gates, everyone looked at Hill, who refused to get off the carriage, with the eyes of looking at a dead person. But the girl didn't care, and focused intently on plucking the petals in her hand. She was using mysticism to divine her fate in the near future. The last petal fell to the right. Hill laughed bitterly. "Looks like my head will fall to the right later." She glanced outside the carriage, and only then realized the atmosphere had become very ominous. But Hill secretly laughed in her heart. "Very good, just as I wished. After you kill me, please be sure to destroy my country too." Since there was nothing else to do anyway, Hill decided to write a will, preparing for her death in an hour. Just as she was thinking about how to make her will spectacular, a tall and imposing man appeared in front of Hill. Her emerald eyes showed disbelief. He was the emperor. She had been lost in thought just now and hadn't noticed his arrival. Suddenly, the emperor grasped Hill's slender waist and leaned down to her ear. The girl panicked, not knowing where to put her hands and feet, her attention unconsciously drawn to the emperor's face. The tyrant from the rumors who could punch a knight to death turned out to be a handsome man. Hill was still blushing and recalling the emperor's rumors, completely unaware that her feet had left the ground. The sudden weightlessness made her struggle involuntarily. She blushed and shouted, "Wait! What are you doing?" The emperor calmly tightened his hold on Hill's waist. "I'm just doing as you requested. What's there to make a fuss about?" Hill looked at the emperor in disbelief. "You're not going to kill me? I'm just from a small country, and I was chosen by your lottery. Yet I dared to demand that you come pick me up, carry me, paint flowers and such. Actually, all these customs were made up by me." The irritable emperor couldn't help but interrupt to correct her. "It wasn't a lottery. Actually, it was throwing dice on a map. Whichever country it landed on had to send me a princess." Hill's face changed drastically upon hearing this. Either way, it was chosen without any sincerity. She secretly turned to glance at the crowd watching. Those people's eyes were even more terrifying, scaring her into immediately grabbing onto the emperor's neck. She had thought the emperor would also look furious, but he wasn't angry at all. Hill couldn't help but question life. Could the tyrant rumors just be gossip? This irritable emperor completed the wedding ceremony in just 10 minutes. The bride was on the verge of tears. That was way too short. She quietly asked her maid, "Is this muscle-bound emperor really as crude as the rumors say?" The blushing maid whispered, "You'll experience it firsthand tonight, Your Majesty." It was this one sentence from the maid that made Hill start overthinking. She sat on the bed blushing, quietly waiting for the emperor's arrival. However, several hours passed, and the emperor never appeared. So Hill stopped restraining herself and flopped down on the bed, carefully examining this luxurious room. She couldn't help but think, "I've been so reckless. Why didn't that rumored irritable emperor kill me? What I did was more than enough to warrant destroying my country." But even though she had survived, Hill didn't dare relax. I didn't die today. Maybe tomorrow when the Emperor is in a bad mood, he'll kill me to vent his anger. At this moment, Hill suddenly realized, right, now is not the time to be lying down. Since I'm going to die either way, let me finish off all the fruits and wine here before I die. Just as Hill got thoroughly drunk and collapsed powerlessly on the bed, the Emperor was in his study discussing the new Empress with his personal guard. The man said expressionlessly, "She doesn't look like she knows how to use swords or poison, I just think she's very beautiful." The guard was incredulous that this man who only knew how to fight would also appreciate a woman's beauty. Suddenly, the Emperor stood up. "Anyway, I'm going to do what I should do today." The guard was scared into a dazed expression. "What you should do today is..." the irritable Emperor said impatiently. "Didn't I get married?" He took out a dagger from the drawer, while saying, "Tonight should be quite lively." Then, the Emperor opened the door, leaving only one sentence. "I'm ready for an unforgettable night," before leaving the study for the bedroom. At this time, Hill's consciousness was blurry. She lay on the bed gasping heavily, thinking helplessly, could that bottle not be wine but actually a drug? But before Hill could wait for the Emperor, she fell asleep under the influence of alcohol. When the man came to the bedroom, what greeted him was only Hill sleeping soundly and even snoring. Hill, who was sleeping soundly, was still in her dream. She dreamed she had returned to the villa where she had lived since childhood, and when she saw the maids who had grown up with her, Hill's excited tears swirled in her eyes. The girl wiped her nose. "What maids? So I didn't get married, I was just having a nightmare." She sat on the steps talking to the maid. "I just had a dream with a damn Emperor in it." But she didn't expect that in the next second. Hill woke up from the dream to find herself still in that luxurious room, with the Emperor wearing only a thin shirt leaning over her body. "This is the first time I've heard someone curse me. How refreshing." Hill's brain stopped thinking momentarily, but she quickly caught the key point. "Wait, why are you on top of me?" The Emperor was amused by her. "Then do you want me to be underneath?" Hill shyly covered her face and shook her head, trying to shake the pornographic images out of her mind. She pushed the Emperor away. "That's not what I meant! Why did you take off your coat?" the Emperor said nonchalantly. "I haven't taken off my pants yet." Hill quickly covered her eyes, not daring to look, but still peeked at the Emperor's abs out of curiosity. Already handsome in the face, and with such a good body too, Hill felt she couldn't resist at all. But she still tried to stay clear-headed. "You perverted Emperor who drugs people, stay away from me!" The Emperor looked puzzled. "When did I drug my bride?" However, this denial seemed like cover-up to Hill. She righteously scolded the Emperor. "Even if you lack confidence in yourself, you can't use such underhanded tactics." The Emperor hurried to explain himself, but Hill wouldn't listen at all. She angrily pointed at the wine bottle not far away. "What misunderstanding? After I drank that bottle of wine, my whole body felt weak, my consciousness was blurred, and my breathing was rapid. So what if you're the Emperor? Having relations without the other party's consent is a crime." However, in the next second, Hill said resentfully while cupping her face, "Actually, if you had seduced me with your face and body, I might have agreed." The Emperor was so scared he immediately backed away, weakly adding, "Actually, that wasn't a drug, it was truth serum, a kind of potion that makes you tell the truth after drinking it." The mortified Hill wished she could disappear from this room immediately. She awkwardly tried to defend herself, but didn't notice the Emperor's face getting closer and closer, his gaze falling where it shouldn't. The next second, the Emperor embraced her and fell onto the bed, smiling and saying, "Let's do what we should do today first." Hill blushed. What does that mean? As the man's large hand tightened around her small hand, the Emperor leaned down and whispered in Hill's ear, "Lie down." Soon, heavy breathing could be heard from the room. A figure hidden in the shadows showed a confident smile. As she expected, the two of them are completely off guard. Suddenly, the maid stabbed toward Hill with a dagger. With a piercing sound, it was the sound of the dagger penetrating flesh. The maid looked in disbelief at the blood on her chest, and the newlywed couple on the bed who hadn't done anything. Impossible! How could they still be on guard in this situation? What she didn't know was that the Emperor had just been giving Hill a massage. The maid died just like that. Hill found it hard to connect the ruthless assassin before her eyes with the cute maid in her memory. She fearfully bit her hand. Why would this assassin want to kill insignificant me, instead of this tyrant Emperor that everyone wants to beat? This vicious Emperor had been tearing apart the assassin with his bare hands 1 second, and the next second gently said to the Empress beside him, "Come sit down, I've cleaned everything up." Hill's mind was still on the scene just now, trembling and not daring to approach. She really regretted making so many unreasonable demands to the Emperor just now. The cowardly Hill flopped down with a thud, sincerely apologizing to the Emperor. "I'm sorry, I dared to raise my head in front of you. Please forgive my rudeness." The Emperor looked down at Hill from above, then turned his head away in disgust. "Your current appearance isn't very appealing." Hill panicked even more, humbly asking the man, "I'm sorry, should I lie down lower?" The Emperor shook his head. "That's not what I meant." Then he pulled Hill into his arms, letting her look down at him. This new Empress immediately blushed, her panicked hands and feet not knowing where to go. "Why is he holding me? Is he going to throw me out too?" The next second, the straight-laced Emperor proudly clapped his hands, admiring his artwork. Hill looked down, puzzled at the bedsheet wrapped around her. What does this mean? The emperor sat down beside her, calmly saying, "Now we can finally have a proper chat." He coughed lightly, covering his unnaturalness. "Your appearance just now didn't seem very suitable for conversation." Hill understood immediately, blushing as she clutched the bedsheet. This shy appearance reminded the emperor of when he and Hill had been pretending to be intimate to lure the assassin. His hand had accidentally brushed across Hill's back. A strange thought broke the straight-laced emperor's inner peace. Her skin is so smooth. His thoughts drifted further and further. A slight blush appeared on the emperor's face. He cursed under his breath, then pushed the inappropriate thoughts to the back of his mind, looking seriously at Hill. "I'm going to ask you some questions, and you must answer truthfully." Hill stared blankly, thinking, "This doesn't look like a conversation. Is this an interrogation?" Then the emperor began questioning Hill about her background. "Although your mother was a servant, because of your appearance, the royal family acknowledged your princess status, but you've been living in a separate palace." Hill nodded honestly. The emperor asked again, "You were accompanied by maids from the separate palace, and your hobby is reading romance novels." Then, the emperor flipped through the materials in his hand, saying seriously, "These novels are almost all adult novels." The princess, being publicly executed, blushed with shame, with only one thought in mind: "Please just kill me." Fortunately, the emperor closed the materials. "Good. That's enough about your identity for now." Then he continued, asking Hill, "Why did you insist on customs that don't exist in your country to make things difficult for me?" Hill, who had inadvertently drunk truth serum, answered immediately, "Because those royal bastards sold me out. I wanted to drag them down with me." The female lead said she hated the tyrant emperor, but her body was very honest. She kept drooling over the emperor's abs and handsome face. "If you weren't the emperor, I would tie you up and enjoy looking at your face to my heart's content." Just when everyone thought the emperor would draw his sword and kill the girl, the emperor didn't get angry, instead nodding approvingly. "Thank you for the compliment. But you won't live long, because all the women who become mine die. Before you entered the palace as empress, all the women those royal ministers pushed on me died. I killed the first one, the other two were killed by others." Hearing this, Hill was so scared she clutched her clothes. But the next second, the emperor said, "But I'm very satisfied with you. I don't plan to kill you, and I've decided to tell you the way to survive here." The girl swallowed nervously. "I'm all ears." The emperor suddenly leaned forward and said, "In this palace, the only way you can survive is to become a more notorious villainess than me." Hill, who had been well-behaved for 20 years, didn't know how to do that for a moment. She hesitantly started to ask the emperor, but unexpectedly, the next second, the emperor grabbed Hill's slender wrist with one large hand, held her slim waist with the other, and pulled hard, making Hill fall onto him. The emperor looked at Hill above him in a good mood. "Like this, do you understand?" The next morning, the maids all gathered together to discuss last night's sounds. "You all heard it, right? Screaming, moaning, and fighting sounds," one of the maids said with a troubled expression. "In that case, who's going to go in and collect the empress's body?" None of the three wanted to go, so they skillfully resolved it with rock, paper, scissors. A little maid who won the game was on the verge of tears. Shouldn't the loser go? The other two little clever ones laughed happily. If the loser went, wouldn't that be punishment? This is a chance to serve Her Majesty the Empress. Of course the winner goes. The little maid had to take the special broom and dustpan for handling corpses and walk toward the Empress's bedroom, thinking, "I hope this corpse is easier to clean up." The little maid didn't know that Empress Hill was sleeping soundly at this moment. Brilliant sunlight streamed through the window onto her golden hair. She turned over and woke up. Hill muttered, "Is it because I slept naked? I feel a bit cold." She suddenly realized something was wrong and looked down to check herself, finding many marks on her body. Only then did Hill realize the intimate acts she had with the Emperor last night. She blushed as she recalled the details. Just then, the little maid walked in. She looked at the very much alive Empress in disbelief, as if seeing a ghost, so scared that the tools in her hands fell to the ground as she shouted in alarm, "Her Majesty, the Empress is still alive!" The Empress was happily taking a bubble bath, constantly recalling last night's details in her mind. The blushing girl shyly splashed the bath water. Last night, the Emperor had planned to teach the well-behaved Hill how to become a villainess, and the first step to becoming a villainess was actually learning to pin down the Emperor. When she was pressed on top of the Emperor, frantically calling the Emperor's name, the man smiled wickedly. "How about it? Isn't it simple? Do you think there's anyone in the world who can sit on top of me?" As he spoke, the Emperor's large hand caressed Hill's face. He said gently, "You're the first, and all you need to do is one thing, which is to possess me, this notorious Emperor." Hill was still confused, she wondered. Although it sounds very attractive, why is this the way to save me? The Emperor suddenly sat up, patiently explaining to his bride, "Someone wants you to become my weakness. They are my enemies. They don't want a virtuous Empress by my side because they want to attack me. And a gentle, kind Empress can't help them complete their plan. So they'll try every way to kill you or bring you down. But if rumors spread that I'm obsessed with a villainess, they won't touch your position as Empress until they get rid of me, right?" Hill nodded. "I understand." However, she was still confused. "But I've never been a villainess. I still don't know what to do." Suddenly, the Emperor smiled wickedly. "Don't worry, I'll tell you the specific plan later. But today there's something more important. As the two got closer and closer, this segment of memory came to an abrupt end. Because Hill found it too embarrassing and simply couldn't continue remembering. Her embarrassed screams startled the maids outside the door. "Your Majesty, are you all right?" Hill replied embarrassedly. "I'm fine, please don't come in." Then, she quietly told herself to calm down. But the next second, the marks on her neck reminded her again of what happened last night. Hill sighed deeply and covered her burning cheeks. The next second, she sank into the bathtub, telling herself to calm down again. But the floodgates of memory in her mind suddenly opened. She remembered that honest emperor unbuttoning his shirt while saying to her, "Although I'd like to stay with you longer, I must go handle those assassins. I'll come back and talk to you about the plan I didn't get to mention because I was captivated by your beauty." Then, the emperor reluctantly gave Hill a parting kiss. Hill, who couldn't control herself, screamed again. She had thought that perfect men who were handsome, well-built, gentle, and considerate only existed in novels. But they existed in real life, too. And he was her husband. Hill stood up, unconsciously writing "my husband" on the mirror, then giggled. But then a voice came. "What are you doing?" Hill turned around in disbelief. The person who had just been in her mind suddenly appeared before her. The emperor's large hand gently caressed Hill's tender face, saying gently, "Don't be nervous, I just came to see if you're feeling uncomfortable anywhere." The nervous Hill breathed a sigh of relief and lowered her defensive little fists. "So the emperor worries about me too?" The girl felt inexplicably. "Good." The emperor carefully examined her, stood up and slowly approached Hill. "You don't seem to be hurt, so I'm relieved. Now we can officially begin." Hill anxiously covered her body, blushing and shouting, "Begin what?" But the emperor said very calmly, "Of course, to discuss our first step plan." Hill, who had been thinking dirty thoughts, embarrassedly turned her head away. After the two conspired in the bathroom for a long time, the emperor sent the sleepy Hill back to the bedroom, while he returned to the study. The guard asked curiously, "Your Majesty, how did last night feel?" The emperor rested his chin in thought for a long time, saying, "It felt quite magical." The guard thought, indeed, very magical. The 4 assassins who tried to kill the emperor last night had no connection to each other whatsoever. He comforted His Majesty. "After all, this is your first time encountering this kind of situation." But the emperor was thinking about his wedding night with his wife. He said seriously, "First, much smaller than I imagined." The guard, not on the same wavelength as the emperor, looked confused. "Your Majesty means the assassins were small?" Then the emperor looked up and said, "And softer than I imagined." The guard was full of question marks. "The assassins were soft?" Then the emperor actually showed a rare, gentle expression, and at night, she looked even more beautiful. The guard was so scared his jaw dropped. "Your Majesty, who are you talking about?" Now it was the emperor's turn to look confused. "Who do you think I'm talking about?" The guard touched his nose and answered confidently, "The assassins, of course." Suddenly, the guard realized, "Wait, could your Majesty be talking about the empress?" But the guard immediately dismissed this thought. "How is that possible? Your Majesty isn't interested in women." Just then, the emperor suddenly stood up and took out a coin. "By the way, take a look at this." The guard took the coin with a grim expression and observed carefully. The symbol on this coin is a silver cross representing faith. Suddenly, the guard's expression changed drastically. "Isn't this the symbol of the Holy Country's death squad?" So, the assassin who tried to kill the empress last night was sent by the saint? And the saint, thousands of miles away from the palace, was standing in front of a statue praying with clenched fists. She was waiting for exciting good news. As she waited anxiously, the followers returned. They said apologetically, "We're sorry, Holy Mother. The mission to assassinate Empress Hill failed." The saint turned around expressionlessly. She suppressed her urge to vent her dissatisfaction and continued brainwashing the followers. "It's all right. This isn't the only opportunity. For us, assassinating Empress Hill is a chance to return this world to its original track." The followers bowed respectfully. "Saint, everything will be as you wish." She impatiently waved them away. Then, in the empty church, she let loose with profanity. "These useless fools. How can they not handle such a small matter?" The saint angrily punched the wall, shouting like a shrew, "If I had transmigrated into the Empress's body from the beginning, I wouldn't have to suffer like this." That's right, this saint was actually the author of the novel A Villain for the Tyrant. She had accidentally transmigrated into her own novel. At first she was thrilled, but when she realized she had transmigrated into a supporting character, she nearly fainted from anger. Because according to the novel's plot development, it should be a modern person's soul transmigrating into the Empress's body, which is why her sudden personality change would interest the Emperor. Thinking about how the novel's setting had completely changed, the saint was so angry she beat her chest. She said resentfully for the 10,000th time, "Why am I not Hill?" The saint huffed and puffed like an old ox, then clenched her fists and said indignantly, "My male lead is mine, Estian is my creation." Thinking of the Emperor's impressive physique and handsome face, the saint swallowed. He simply fulfilled all her fantasies about the opposite sex. The saint really wanted to see the Emperor, but in the story setting, she could only pray within the barrier, trapped by the barrier and unable to do anything. That's why she sent people to assassinate Hill. Once Hill died, her soul could possess the female lead's body, and then this author who had transmigrated into her own novel could have both her beloved male lead and the male supporting characters. However, this wonderful fantasy was instantly shattered, because she soon heard that the emperor had lost his chastity. She trembled with rage, looking toward the palace and saying, "I can't delay any longer. If the keywords I set disappear one by one." Bang! She angrily punched the barrier. Unexpectedly, the pale blue magical power on the barrier kept jumping. The next second, the barrier that had been trapping the saint actually cracked with a snap. She was so scared she didn't react for a moment, saying blankly, "Could this be the power of love?" The little wife was bullied to tears by the emperor, because the emperor wouldn't let her be a good person and insisted she become a villainess. The crying Hill felt so wronged, accidentally telling the emperor the truth. "You once razed forests and wheat fields to the ground, and destroyed the port, causing the duchy's trade to go completely bankrupt. Even if I become a villainess, how can I surpass your infamy?" The emperor laughed. No one had ever dared say this to his face. The previous 3 empresses couldn't even make eye contact with the emperor. Now he was more and more satisfied with Hill. Just then, Hill boldly asked, "Your Majesty, there's something I'm curious about. Have you shared a bed with those 3 empresses?" The emperor said very decisively, "No." Hill lowered her head and smiled sweetly. "Very good. Truly perfect." The emperor was puzzled. "Although, I don't know what you mean by perfect. I hope you can use perfect acting to become a villainous empress." Then, the emperor turned off the room's lights, embraced Hill's waist, and said, "For the remaining time, let's practice first." The next morning, warm sunlight illuminated this magnificent palace. The maids gossiped during their break. "Have you heard that rumor? They say His Majesty is so captivated by the Empress's beauty that he hasn't stepped outside the palace gates, and he's even cancelled all official duties, declaring he'll only stay in the Empress's palace." The nobles were also discussing this matter. They smiled maliciously. "That's probably just temporary. But the Empress does seem quite beautiful. Curious how good the Empress is at acting cute." Everyone stood in the banquet hall waiting expectantly, because today was the Empress's first time attending a formal occasion. With the announcement Her Majesty the Empress arrives, Hill walked into the banquet hall. Her fair skin was nearly transparent in the sunlight, her golden hair braided and wound around the back of her head. Even from behind you could tell Hill was a beauty. After seeing Hill's face, the men stared wide-eyed, while the women blushed. She was like a red rose with dewdrops, so charming and a perfect match for the imposing emperor. Everyone was so shocked they couldn't speak. The noisy banquet hall instantly became so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Those who had previously scorned Hill regretted it deeply. "My God, I couldn't see clearly before because of the veil. I didn't expect the Empress to be so beautiful." Just as everyone was stunned, the Emperor said in a deep voice, "As you all know, I have married the Empress. You have always been loyal to me, and I hope you will be equally loyal to the Empress in the future." The ministers and nobles immediately knelt down, saying in unison, "We will be loyal to Her Majesty the Empress." The Emperor didn't speak, but looked at Hill beside him. She immediately understood, and said, "Everyone may rise." A kneeling minister curled his lip. "Looks like the Empress wants to show off." Even so, how long can the Emperor's favor toward the Empress last? 1 week? But the next scene slapped him hard in the face. A pale hand reached up to touch the tyrant's face. This person actually dared to brazenly flirt with the Emperor in public. Just as all the ministers were shocked speechless, she boldly moved even closer, breathing softly in the Emperor's ear. "Your Majesty, when will you fulfill what you promised me?" Everyone immediately concluded that this woman was doomed. His Imperial Majesty extremely detested physical contact with others. "Look, His Majesty will send her to her death with 1 strike." However, what they never expected was, the tyrant actually smiled and pulled the woman closer, saying, "I didn't expect you to be so impatient." Hill immediately used her small fists to playfully hit the Emperor's chest, acting coquettishly. "Before coming here, didn't you keep saying you'd give me a huge surprise? Are you lying to me? You said there would be Imperial protection here." The ministers' and nobles' faces immediately turned pale. Where did this spoiled brat come from? Unexpectedly, the tyrant's demeanor also completely changed. "Can't you see? These ministers are all the protection of our empire." This flattery made the ministers want to vomit their dinner from last night. The next second, the emperor said they were like dogs, devoting themselves wholeheartedly to the empire. The courtiers who got scolded daily were comfortable now, thinking with smiles, "This is our emperor." At this moment, the empress dissatisfiedly patted the emperor's arm. "You know, the treasure I want isn't this. I'm leaving first." Unexpectedly, the usually impatient emperor actually humbled himself to coax the empress. "Oh my empress is truly impatient, but that's exactly your charm. I really can't do anything with you." Then the two began flirting in broad daylight in front of everyone. The ministers were almost petrified. His Majesty is completely indulging the Empress. And how are they managing to act as if no one else exists? At this moment, the Emperor gestured, having the palace maids present what he had arranged. This large chest of gold, silver, and jewels blinded the nobles' eyes. not to mention the continuous procession of servants presenting gemstones. The ministers couldn't help but think, with such luxurious gifts, the empress should be stunned. Unexpectedly, the empress was actually bored enough to yawn. She hugged the emperor's arm tightly and said, "Isn't there anything more special and interesting?" The ministers were so shocked by the empress's bold behavior their mouths wouldn't close. Has she gone mad? Does she think she can get away with this? The gemstones piled over there could buy an entire territory. Unexpectedly, this tyrant emperor completely listened to the empress. He smiled and looked down. "These are just appetizers. The main course comes later." Then, a ruby the size of a fist was presented. The noble ladies on the side were filled with envy. Even more royal treasures were displayed before the empress. Even the founding emperor's treasure, the all-red emerald, was to be given to her. A noble lady immediately covered her gaping mouth with her hand, hardly believing, "That's a treasure passed down only to emperors." Under everyone's astonished gazes, the emperor picked up the emerald and said to the empress with tender affection, "The moment I saw your eyes, I thought of this gemstone. I want to make it our wedding ring." The emperor placed the emerald on the empress's hand, but the next second, the empress carelessly removed the emerald, threw it forcefully, and the precious stone bounced off the walls, finally landing in a flower vase. Everyone immediately applauded and cheered, "She made it! Perfect shot!" But the next second, they realized the gemstone just thrown was that national treasure. In the quiet banquet hall, the empress revealed a mocking smile. "Your Majesty, the gemstone was too small and got blown away by the wind." But this empress, who was so arrogantly showing off, was crying inside. "Your Majesty, I did everything according to your instructions. I didn't do anything wrong, did I?" Woo! Just when everyone was certain the tyrant emperor would never forgive her, the emperor also grabbed a national treasure and smashed it forcefully. Everyone was so scared their eyeballs nearly popped out, only to hear the tyrant gently say to Hill, "The empress is absolutely right. The gemstone was too small and got blown away by the wind." This performance was very successful. Now all the nobles and ministers were convinced that Hill was an evil empress, while the tyrant silently praised Hill in his heart. "Well done," she remembered when she revealed this plan last night. Hill cried like a little puppy with tears in her eyes. "Your Majesty, I can't do it. You're actually asking me to throw the national treasure. How can I do such a thing?" The emperor had no choice but to say helplessly, "Do you choose death or do you choose to throw it?" Hill immediately gave in and flexed her biceps, saying, "My arm strength is very powerful. I'll throw it properly." Looking at the national treasure emerald that was precisely thrown into the flower vase, the emperor had the absurd thought, "She's really good at this." She kept complaining she couldn't do it, but performed quite well in actual combat. The emperor decided to also showcase his acting skills. He looked at Hill with deep affection and said, "Empress, please extend your hand." Then he put a huge sapphire ring on her finger and wrapped a pearl necklace with full round pearls around the empress's neck several times. The ministers at this time were continuously shocked. They watched as the tyrant patiently dressed up the empress. He removed small earrings and put gorgeous earrings decorated with red spinel on the empress. After that, he continuously put bracelets, necklaces, and rings on her. He practically put all the royal gemstones on the empress. The nobles covered their mouths in disbelief. My God, the gemstones the empress is wearing must be worth an entire country. However, beyond everyone's expectations, the empress was actually not satisfied. She casually tugged at the necklace around her neck, saying, "Wedding gifts should be new, right? These are all too old." Everyone was stunned. Because of the empress's words, the royal treasures that had witnessed history suddenly became worthless old things. A minister couldn't stand it anymore and anxiously shouted, "Your Majesty, even if it's Her Majesty the Empress, she cannot." But the emperor didn't listen to advice at all. He gently caressed the empress's face and said, "Then next week I will conquer other kingdoms and present you with new gemstones." Only then was the empress satisfied and smiled. But actually, she only had one thought. "How heavy is this necklace? It feels like my neck is about to break." The little wife cried until she was out of breath. The tyrant emperor frantically tried to comfort her. He had no choice but to lean down and kiss away the tears on his little wife's body. The empress immediately stopped crying. She shouted in panic, "Wait, Your Majesty, you're not going to—" A blush appeared on Hill's cheeks. But the next second, before she could think more, the straight man emperor reached out a hand and firmly struck the back of Hill's neck. Having gotten excited for nothing, she immediately fainted. The straight man emperor gently placed Hill on the bed. Looking at his little wife's peaceful sleeping face, he couldn't help but sigh. Indeed, this method is the most effective. He tenderly caressed Hill's red and swollen eyes from crying, murmuring to himself, "Just breaking one national treasure made you worry so much." Speaking of which, the emperor picked up a book about national treasure legends from Hill's hand. He said coldly, "Tomorrow no. Tonight I'll have the guy who wrote this beaten severely." Afterwards, the emperor left the empress's chamber and returned to his study to handle the important matters he had delayed. The guard curiously asked him, "Has Her Majesty the Empress calmed down?" The emperor sighed helplessly. "No, she cried until she was out of breath, so I just knocked her out." The guard laughed awkwardly. Truly the tyrant's style. The emperor loosened his shirt buttons and closed his eyes wearily, saying, "Let's not talk about this. What movements are there from those who want to assassinate the empress?" The guard stopped gossiping and became serious, as you expected. "Your announcement today about attacking the Emerald Kingdom for the empress was too unexpected, so they had an emergency meeting, making them easy to track. This is today's meeting attendance list." The tyrant discovered these were all people hostile to him. He snorted disdainfully. "What did they say?" The attendant shrugged and took out documents, just some obvious things, saying the empire will be ruined this way. The mad emperor has been bewitched by the mad empress. Those two are truly a perfect match. The attendant paused and carefully glanced at the emperor, then continued, "But the empress is indeed very beautiful, even if I were 10 years younger." Hearing this, the emperor angrily crushed the chair's armrest. This terrified the attendant. "Your Majesty, are you all right? The chair's armrest is broken." The tyrant looked gloomy, waved his hand saying he was fine, then coldly asked, "Who was that guy clamoring about being 10 years younger?" The attendant said while sweating, "A viscount." He thought, tomorrow this viscount would disappear from the empire. Then, the attendant mentioned very important information. When the meeting ended, they mainly discussed Her Majesty the Empress. Some hostile nobles seemed to want to plant quite a few spies. The emperor smiled coldly. Supporting his chin, he said condescendingly, "Very good. Starting next week, these people's cries will echo throughout the palace." The empress's stunning beauty became even more breathtaking under the jewelry's enhancement. All the men and women present secretly swallowed their saliva. The tyrant emperor got angry. He grabbed a bedsheet, wrapped the empress tightly in it, then carried her away in a princess carry. His little wife was for his eyes only. He placed the empress on the soft bed in the bedroom. Looking at the delicate skin under Hill's emerald necklace, the emperor couldn't help but secretly sigh. "When I put all those gemstones on her during the day, I simply thought it was fun, but now..." He quietly tightened his arm around Hill. His little wife blushed and pushed the emperor away, shouting, "No! I need some things!" The emperor tilted his head like a big dog. "Do you have some special fetish?" Hill immediately clarified. She wasn't like that. "I need gemstones, and I need many large ones." It turned out that while the emperor was handling official business, a green little elf had found Hill. After listening to 4 full hours of nagging, she couldn't take it anymore. Seeing his goal achieved, the little elf crossed his arms and said, "Just give me money and I'll leave you alone." Hill nodded and immediately agreed. But the little elf demanded an outrageous amount. 10 million gold coins, paid in full at once. The penniless empress suddenly smiled brilliantly. "No money, but I have my life." Finally, the little elf compromised, saying he just needed to find a gemstone that elves could live in. So Hill foolishly loaded herself up with gemstones. The emperor, who couldn't bear to see Hill work so hard, drew his sword with a gloomy expression. "Quick, pick anyone!" The little elf screamed in terror. "Humans actually want to kill elves. I will curse your descendants." "I'm serious, this is our specialty," but the emperor said calmly. "I never planned on having descendants anyway, so killing you doesn't matter." The speaker meant nothing, but the listener took it to heart. Hill was stunned. His little wife hugged the emperor's arm and acted coquettishly. "Your Majesty, I want something. Can you give it to me?" The emperor unconsciously swallowed. He pulled Hill's waist close and said, "What do you want?" But the next second, Hill actually pushed the tyrant away. She looked up and said, "Before you give me that thing, all intimate behavior is forbidden." The emperor anxiously clenched his fists and asked in confusion, "What exactly do you want?" Hill smiled composedly. "Your Majesty said, you would give me a gemstone called the Forest of Satin. I want that." The emperor lowered his head, gently held a strand of Hill's hair, and kissed it. "No problem." That night the two of them just chatted under the covers. The next day was the day for the empress to select her maids. Early in the morning, the palace maids were busy and dizzy. They brought 50 sets of gifts prepared by the most famous designers, and the latest accessories that were blindingly bright. The palace maids nervously showed them to Hill. "Your Majesty the Empress, what kind of styling would you like?" But unexpectedly, Hill said indifferently, "You decide for yourselves." The palace maids continued, asking, "Your Majesty the Empress, should we style your hair a bit higher?" Hill was missing the emperor and had no mood to respond, dismissing them again with "You decide for yourselves," looking at her absolutely beautiful appearance in the mirror. She couldn't help but think of what the emperor had casually said last night. What does "I never planned on having descendants anyway" mean? Rumor had it that the emperor married the empress not for love but only to continue his lineage. But now the emperor said he had no such intention. Hill couldn't help but overthink. That means I won't be empress for long before having to give way to someone else. Thinking about how she once fantasized about being a family of 3 with the emperor, Hill felt ridiculous. But the girl thought again. Last night when she casually mentioned wanting the Forest of Satin, she was just trying to be unreasonable, but unexpectedly the emperor agreed without hesitation, just as she was lost in thought. A little elf that only Hill could see suddenly appeared. He actually shouted, "I think the emperor doesn't want descendants because he's a eunuch." Hill was so scared she screamed, "Shut up!" But the maids nearby thought she was scolding them. The two were so frightened they trembled and quickly retreated. The little elf continued chattering at Hill. This is the most reasonable answer. The emperors I know generally have 3,000 beauties in their harems. But Estienne currently only has you as his legitimately married wife. This is 100% problematic. Hill blushed and told the little elf, but at night, before she could say the details, she was interrupted by a maid's announcement. Your Majesty the Empress, it's time to go out. Hill turned around, no longer paying attention to the little elf, and transformed back into that high and mighty empress, walking out the door. This is the most wife-doting emperor I've ever seen. The empress just wanted an emerald, and he personally attacked the country with the most emeralds. However, this wife-spoiling maniac said to a man, "Take off your clothes." The pockmarked man's face instantly turned red. The emperor smirked and said, "I told you to take off your clothes so I can use them to wipe off the blood." The blood on the black iron sword quickly stained a white shirt red. Just then, a man suddenly came back to life. He resentfully cursed the emperor. "You should go to hell!" After hearing this, the emperor said nothing, but viciously stepped on his back and ground his foot several times. The king on the side was terrified and immediately knelt to present the national treasure. This was a sparkling emerald. The emperor was satisfied as he accepted it, thinking his little wife should be pleased now. The king on the side was still courting death, angrily scolding the emperor. "You're so inhumane, entering other countries' territories for no reason to steal treasures. Is this what an emperor should do? You're just a bandit." The emperor's expression instantly darkened. "You say no reason? You colluded with the Dia Duchy to mine Celcita silver, and in this world the only person who can be harmed by Celcita silver is me. This is why I trampled and burned this place." But the next second, the emperor's expression suddenly softened. "But don't worry, I didn't plan to do that today. Because the empress is still waiting for me, I need to hurry back." However, when he returned to the palace, Hill didn't come out to warmly welcome him. Only a childhood friend who had grown up with him was there. The emperor smiled and said, "Take her away." Then he snapped his fingers and had the guards carry her away without any pity. The cold-blooded emperor thought, an useless obstacle actually came. Now his mind was full of his little wife Hill. He was thinking, after I give her the emerald, what will she say? The emperor touched his chin, seriously considering. First, I need to finish what we couldn't do that day. She must be eagerly waiting for me to come back quickly. Besides that, should I have her do something to repay me? Lost in fantasy, the emperor hurried to Hill's chamber. Click, he opened the door full of expectation, but saw a heartbreaking scene. His beloved little wife was intimately feeding a strawberry to a young girl's mouth. The emperor's expression instantly darkened, his whole body emanating a sour smell. Hill felt like she'd been caught cheating and awkwardly called out, "Your Majesty!" His expression immediately became gloomy. "Doesn't the empress want to explain?" Hill quickly explained that she was just a maid. The emperor held the gemstone, very dissatisfied. "You're already so intimate when she just arrived? It seems you don't need my gemstone." His little wife seemed oblivious to the emperor's jealousy. Thanks to her, the little elf stopped bothering me. Hill couldn't help complaining. "Your Majesty, you don't know how talkative Allred is." He kept whispering in my ear about how Your Majesty is incompetent. The air suddenly went quiet. Hill quickly covered her mouth, wanting to swallow back her words, but the tyrant pried Hill's hands away. He looked down at Hill's skin that was flushed from embarrassment, smiling. He actually dared to say that. Afterwards, the tyrant played with the gemstone. The little elf lay on the ground humbly begging for mercy. "Please don't break it, I finally finished rebuilding." The little elf looked at Hill collapsed exhausted on the bed, and finally tearfully admitted he was talking nonsense. After getting a satisfactory answer, the tyrant casually tossed the gemstone. The little elf immediately screamed in terror. "No, please stop. Do you really want to try being cursed?" The tyrant said indifferently. "Before that happens, wouldn't it be fine to eliminate you with the black iron sword?" The little elf shuddered. "This man is so scary. Black iron swords generally cannot be used by humans unless—" The little elf suddenly asked the tyrant, "Did you drink Yusendif's blood?" The little elf had a realization. "No wonder you don't want children, because you might give birth to monsters." The tyrant suddenly swung his sword, his face dark and dangerous. "How much do you know about this matter?" The little elf cried, saying he wasn't clear either, but if spared, he would go to the elf realm to help the tyrant investigate. The tyrant released the elf and had him go explain that statement to Hill himself. The next day, the tyrant found his little wife to have her cooperate with a plan. As they were talking, there was a minister's knock at the door. The tyrant looked down to see his little wife only wrapped in a bedsheet, looking at him innocently. He silently swallowed, turned and slammed the door shut with a bang, looking sharply at the minister. "Don't come in." Hill on the bed looked confused. The tyrant turned and threw clothes and jewelry to Hill. Hill stared at the emperor strangely. The man felt a bit uncomfortable under his wife's gaze and couldn't help asking, "What's wrong?" Hill said with a red face, "Does your majesty like this outfit?" The straight man emperor instantly blushed. "It feels pretty good." Hill happily said, "Then I'll change right away." The minister shutout was very depressed and could only report work through the door. The Di Duchy discovered mysterious artifacts during archaeology and wants to present them as tribute. Hill immediately became interested. What tribute? The emperor looked at Hill expectantly. We'll know when the time comes, and your task is to thoroughly humiliate the Dia Duchy delegation's dignity. In the majestic hall, the envoy was presenting tribute to the emperor, when suddenly the empress interrupted the process. In the middle of summer, she pulled the tyrant's hand and acted coquettishly. Your Majesty, I'm so cold! The envoy looked at her in shock. This woman dares to approach the tyrant. Just when everyone thought she was doomed, the tyrant gently embraced Hill. Then the two actually cuddled in public. The ignored envoy finally couldn't help but speak. This is tribute from the Dia Duchy. Before the envoy finished speaking, Hill contemptuously interrupted. I've never heard of such a country. Without fruits or gemstones, I have no interest in this country. Hill immediately buried herself in the emperor's embrace. How could she not know this was the second largest country in the Jikore Empire? But to maintain her evil woman persona externally, Hill could only say this. The emperor held Hill and whispered in her ear, your acting always amazes me. The emperor used Hill's words to make things difficult for the envoy. It seems you have nothing to satisfy the empress. The envoy panicked and immediately explained, we discovered something more valuable in the underground ancient prison. Hill laughed charmingly and delivered the final blow. You didn't just dig it up from the dirt and give it a quick wash before bringing it here, did you? The envoy looked speechlessly at this couple. These two are surprisingly consistent in being annoying. The emperor had the envoys withdraw, saying he and the empress were tired and needed rest. Someone from the delegation suddenly rushed out, loudly saying, please wait, your imperial majesty. Hill glanced at that person. She remembered the emperor's warning. Be careful of people who seem particularly ordinary. Hill reached out to gently tug the emperor's collar, whispering, your majesty, it's that man. The emperor drew his long sword with a dark expression. He had been waiting for this moment. Before Hill could react, the tyrant's long sword pierced through that person's chest. The people around were used to the irritable emperor's behavior. They whispered, that man is truly pitiful. However, as the cloak fell, that person actually didn't die. The silver-haired man smiled and greeted, worthy of being your imperial majesty, you immediately drew your sword. The emperor had an expression like he already knew you wouldn't die, as expected. It's you, Richard. The man smiled and presented an opened box. Everyone discussed among themselves. Some said it was an egg, others said it was a square stone. Richard explained, this is a phantom beast egg. Everyone sees it differently. Only when it touches the strongest person will the phantom beast egg shatter. Richard looked at the emperor eagerly with starry eyes. Your Majesty, would you like to touch it? The emperor suddenly grabbed and held down Richard. Try saying one more word. Still unwilling to give up, he continued persuading the emperor to try. Just as the two were in a standoff, Hill noticed the phantom beast egg floating up and flying straight toward the emperor. Seeing it was about to hit the emperor, Hill immediately flew forward to block it. The moment the phantom beast egg touched Hill, it burst with golden light. The emperor looked back in surprise. Richard laughed indifferently. The phantom beast egg won't react to such an ordinary woman. However, when he looked up in surprise, after the phantom beast egg shattered and the light faded, a massive creature appeared. It was actually a legendary dragon. This evil dragon wanted to kill the empress, so the emperor immediately drew his sword to protect his little wife. Ignoring Hill's struggles, he forcibly had the guards take the empress away. As the door closed, the emperor's broad back was frozen in Hill's vision. With his little wife gone, the emperor had no more concerns. Just as he was about to raise his sword, he saw a fearless mage walk up to the giant dragon. With starry eyes, he said fanatically, if I can catch this dragon, I can do deeper research. Just as the mage was racking his brains on how to catch the giant dragon stepped on the mage with one claw and ground down hard. A mere human wants to catch me? Then the giant dragon turned to survey the other humans in the palace. It spat disdainfully. These cowards I could crush with one foot. Then it looked at the emperor and silently said, that guy looks difficult to deal with. Before the giant dragon could attack, the emperor charged at the dragon's spine with his black iron sword. With a clang, the man pierced a big hole through the ceiling, and the giant dragon fell painfully onto the rooftop. It was furious. Its sharp claws shattered the building beneath its feet, its roar echoing throughout the palace. A mere human dares to hurt me. The emperor said coldly, what's the point of saying this after getting beaten? But he knew in his heart, although the giant dragon was knocked down by the sword energy, it was completely unharmed. The man gripped his black iron sword tightly and cursed under his breath. Damn! Bloodthirsty thoughts surged again in his heart. Countless voices rang in his ears, tear it apart, then slowly toy with it. But the emperor suppressed the dark thoughts deep within. If I act here, the palace will become ruins, and Hill won't survive either. The emperor had no choice but to remove his cheat ability and said to the giant dragon with his sword, this is enough to deal with you. The enraged giant dragon roared to the sky. What an arrogant human! In its fury, it unleashed dragon's breath that could reduce humans to ashes. However, just then, a maid who had been hiding on the rooftop cried and punched the giant dragon. shouting, "I hate lizards even more than cockroaches." With this punch, the seemingly invincible giant dragon actually got a fracture. The emperor looked at the maid in disbelief. Worthy of being the earl's daughter, incredible strength is in her DNA. It turned out the most dangerous person was right beside Hill. After being hurt, the evil dragon roared angrily, "You're the first female who could hit me with bare hands! Human, as a return gift, I'll make you die in agony." She swung her tail that was heavier than mountains. The maid closed her eyes and calmly accepted her death. But just then, Empress Hill appeared holding a book. She anxiously threw herself into the emperor's arms, saying, "I have a way to deal with the evil dragon, but you need to take me there first." The emperor was stunned. This was the first time someone offered to protect him. Seeing Hill's injured and dirty appearance, he felt incredibly guilty. He didn't send Hill away to watch her get hurt. The emperor touched the wound on Hill's face with heartache. His little wife got angry. "What time is it and you're still being romantic? Quickly deal with this evil dragon. Just recite this incantation and the evil dragon will fall," the emperor asked curiously. "So where's the incantation?" Hill proudly displayed the romance novel in her hand. Looking at this melodramatic book title, the emperor could hardly believe it. Hill was on the verge of tears. "I knew you'd make that expression, but please trust me just this once." How could the emperor refuse when his little wife said this? He put one arm around Hill's waist and held her hand with the other, bringing Hill before the evil dragon. She recited the incantation to subdue the evil dragon. "I, the Supreme One, command you, this foolish evil creature." One wing bound by Ishid's chains. Suddenly, a glowing magic circle appeared above the evil dragon, and a magic chain tightly wound around its wing. Everyone was shocked. This incantation that sounded like nonsense actually worked. Hill continued, the other wing pierced by Ophi's spear, the third wing wounded by Durik's sword. The immobilized giant dragon roared and struggled in anger. A huge boulder came flying toward Hill. Fortunately, the emperor was quick to protect her. Hill was still shaken. She held the book and recited the final incantation, "The last wing by the one who dominates all, me." Before she finished, many golden chains descended from the magic circle in the sky, leaving the giant dragon with nowhere to escape or cause trouble. Half a sentence remained. Hill anxiously flipped through the book, but she had no idea how to pronounce this half sentence. After a bunch of gibberish, magical operations, the evil dragon weakly collapsed on the ground, no longer having its previous arrogant appearance. It actually closed its eyes and acted coquettishly toward Hill. "I was wrong, Mommy." Everyone looked at the delicate empress in amazement. She was actually the strongest woman on this continent. The evil dragon that was bound by the empress's spell instantly transformed into a soft and cute little dragon. Faced with human interrogation, the little dragon said disdainfully, "Insolent. I'm not an existence you humans can mention. I am a great being and the last descendant of the dragon race." Clang, the maid on the side really couldn't stand it anymore. She punched and shattered the wall beside the little dragon, and gave a threatening smile. The little dragon cried in fear, "My name is Galgandia, father unknown, mother was dragon nobility, heard she died in Dark 7, in the interrogation room." The empress sat on the emperor's sturdy thighs to listen in. After getting no more information, Hill and the emperor left. Exhausted, Hill just wanted to quickly return to her room, finish the novel she hadn't completed, then sleep. But, for some reason, the emperor also followed Hill into the room. She looked at the man reluctantly, but accidentally spoke her thoughts aloud. The emperor said coldly, "What? I can't come in," just as Hill was hastily denying it. The emperor walked to the bookshelf. "I want to see what books the empress usually reads." He casually pulled out a book. Hill was immediately scared stiff. She reached out and said, "Wait, you can't read that book." But the emperor was already reading lines from the book. "Every night he transforms into a beast." Not expecting her hidden romance novel to be discovered, Hill's face turned bright red, not knowing how to respond for a moment. The man suddenly embraced Hill from behind and said with great anticipation, "Can you read it to me from beginning to end?" Holding this book, Hill was very embarrassed and stammered for a long time, unable to speak. After forcing herself to read a few sentences, she really couldn't continue. "No, this is too shameful." So Hill looked at the emperor pleadingly. "Can't we do it a different way?" The emperor chuckled and said, "If you don't want to read, how about trying it yourself?" Early the next morning, the emperor held his little wife, thinking, "It seems there's no need to act in front of the ministers anymore." He played with his wife's hair, his hard heart becoming soft at this moment. Could this feeling be love? But the next second, the emperor suddenly stood up and turned away from Hill. How could it be love? Just pretending. Someone who doesn't even count, as human, doesn't deserve love. This is the most doting king I've ever seen. To make his little wife happy, he actually gave her the entire treasury. Hill held the treasury inventory list, her eyes nearly popping out in shock. What? How are there so many? 4th century antique instruments? Tables that automatically prepare tea and cakes when you sit down. And 120 bolts of fabric woven by elves that could each equal a castle in value. Looking at all the gold, silver, and jewels scattered around, Hill felt overwhelmed. If I move all these to the queen's chambers, I could probably swim in gold coins. Hill was dazed by all the money. She tried to maintain her composure as she walked out of the treasury. "I'll go for a walk first and come back to count later." Walking in the garden, a happy smile appeared on Hill's face. "I only said I was bored, and he actually gave me the entire treasury." Just then, voices of other people came from the garden. Hill curiously approached. It was the palace maids. What were they talking about? She heard one maid whisper, "The reason the king opened the treasury to Her Majesty the Queen is to prevent the queen from leaving the palace, because the continent's most beautiful woman, Princess Anna, has arrived at the banquet hall." Another maid exclaimed excitedly, "This must be a honey trap." Princess Anna cast the bait, and His Majesty immediately took it. The smile on Hill's face froze. She emerged menacingly from the flower bushes and said to the terrified maids, "Tell me exactly what happened just now." Meanwhile, Princess Anna sat across from the king with a smile. Everyone who saw her blushed. The men stared with straight eyes, but only the emperor remained unmoved. He looked at the ruby on Anna's chest, lost in thought. "Is that the victory that enchants hearts?" The man couldn't help but sigh. "It's indeed very powerful. If I look closer, I should be more certain," but his careful examining gaze was misunderstood by a minister nearby. He whispered gossip to his colleague. "It seems His Majesty is also interested in Princess Anna." Others chimed in. If only Princess Anna had come earlier, well-educated and proper, without a single flaw. "No matter how you look at it, she's better than the current." Before he could finish, the king's cold gaze fell on him and the minister dared not continue. Princess Anna said very gently, "You flatter me. I hope His Majesty thinks the same." Unexpectedly, the next second, the wife-doting maniac king actually asked Princess Anna to come to his side. The man observed the ruby intently, not noticing that Anna's hand had touched his chin. Suddenly, with a clang, the banquet hall doors were thrown open. Hill appeared wearing a beautiful little dress, smiling at the king. "You seem to be having a great time. This queen actually just wrapped herself in some cloth to attend the banquet." The ministers were about to criticize her lack of propriety, but 7 pairs of eyes honestly stuck to the queen. The continent's most beautiful woman standing beside the emperor suddenly panicked. "Why is no one paying attention to me?" When the ministers saw clearly what fabric she was wearing, their jaws dropped even more. She actually dares to drag fabric worth hundreds of millions on the ground, and dressed so improperly. Where's the dignity of a queen? The emperor will surely be furious and kill her. But the emperor said nothing, just stared blankly at Hill. Hill slowly approached. When she saw Princess Anna and her husband so close together, she looked up with an even, brighter smile. "Your Majesty, you seem very happy." The emperor's back went cold, feeling like he'd been bitten by a poisonous snake. He asked the queen, "What is this?" Hill smiled charmingly. "Please forgive my rudeness. Receiving such precious fabric, how could I remain unmoved?" The emperor knew his little wife was definitely angry. Jealously, he thought. Even if he let the queen deliberately make things difficult for Princess Anna, the queen didn't need to dress so provocatively. Hill turned to look at the shocked crowd, pretending to be apologetic. "Oh my, why does everyone have such expressions? It's as if I've come somewhere I shouldn't be." She lowered her head and asked the emperor darkly, "There's one chair missing here. Where should I sit?" The emperor understood and grinned. "I really can't do anything with you." He pulled the queen into an embrace and began their public display of affection. Hill was very satisfied with this human cushion. She happily hugged the emperor and announced, "Everyone, please continue enjoying the banquet." The princess, who had been ignored by Hill the whole time, was completely speechless. What kind of person is this? The emperor kept smiling while holding his wife. Hill got annoyed seeing his expression. "So you're that happy eating with Princess Anna?" Hill harbored mischievous thoughts and made moves that everyone didn't want to see. The emperor couldn't control himself and quickly grabbed Hill's troublemaking hand. Seeing Hill's fake innocent expression, he suddenly laughed. "Why do I smell such a strong, sour scent?" Hill found it really strange, Your Majesty. You've been smiling since earlier. What's making you so happy? The emperor didn't answer, just suddenly called Hill's name. Hill corrected him. "Don't call my name in formal settings." The emperor looked at his wife's dress, suppressing laughter. "So you came dressed so formally." Hill quickly acted cute, just considered that I was too happy receiving the gift. "So you dragged precious fabric on the ground like burlap?" Hill puffed her cheeks and got angry again. The emperor found it amusing, his heart pounding. Looking at the queen's angry expression, why did it make him so happy? Hill asked coquettishly. "Your Majesty, is it amusing?" The emperor smiled in good mood. "If the queen finds it boring, then these incompetent people should all get lost." The musicians suddenly felt their necks go cold. Hill casually continued, "Yes, then use them as fertilizer for the lotus flowers." The emperor raised an eyebrow. "My wife is indeed quite angry today. If it were usual, hearing me say this, you'd definitely whine and want to go back." Seeing the emperor not responding, Hill thought her words were too harsh and was about to change them when the emperor suddenly leaned close to her ear and whispered, "That works too." The group of ignored people around them had black lines on their faces. First they were shown affection, then forced to worry about our lives. These two perverts are indeed a perfect match. Suddenly Hill changed her mind again. "I thought of a better method." The emperor asked curiously, "A better method?" "It's that dragon. I heard it's been having poor appetite lately," Hill said with an evil smile. "How about preparing a special meal for the dragon?" The musicians were completely terrified. Did they hear wrong? A dragon. The queen wants to feed them to the dragon? Help! "Your Majesty, this old minister's meat is too tough. The dragon might get it stuck in its teeth." Hill ignored them but looked with an evil smile at the ignored beautiful princess. Dragons seemed to like pretty things. Princess Anna was frightened. Are these two really going to use me as dragon food? Seeing the beauty trembling constantly, Hill chuckled in the emperor's arms. "Oh my, it's just a joke. Why are you so scared? I was just thinking of trying it with the peacocks you brought this time." The princess's hand shook with anger. "That's an extremely rare winter peacock." She hoped the emperor would scold the spoiled Hill, but the emperor held Hill and said, "Whatever, as long as you're happy." He picked up the hem of Hill's dress and looked at his little wife dotingly. "It seems 10 years of exclusive use of this fabric isn't enough. I guarantee, as long as you live, this fabric will be yours for life." Everyone was shocked by the inhumane emperor. That's worth hundreds of millions of precious things. After speaking, the emperor carried his little wife and left directly, not even glancing at the beautiful princess. The envoys exploded over the domineering emperor's actions. While the beautiful princess secretly gritted her teeth, the queen went too far. After Hill was carried back to the palace by the emperor, she began crying grievously. The emperor thought apologizing should be enough to coax his wife. But this emperor, who had been arrogant for over 20 years, encountered an unprecedented problem. His little wife asked him specifically what he did wrong. The emperor was confused. Wrong about what? Hill looked at the emperor expectantly. She remembered what a maid had said when she was little. "Princess, if you ever fight with a lover in the future, you can't just let it go after they apologize. You must keep asking." The little girl was puzzled. "Isn't an apology enough?" The maid quickly explained. "No, there are many people in the world who apologize unconditionally without knowing what they did wrong. If you keep asking and they say, 'I already apologized, why are you still asking?'" The maid seriously warned the little girl. "Then you must definitely dump that person," not hearing an answer for a long time. Hill lowered her head, somewhat disappointed. Actually, with the emperor's noble status, he doesn't need to apologize to anyone. Being able to do this much is already a huge favor. But Hill was still very sad. "I really shouldn't have had expectations." But the next second, the emperor gently lifted Hill's head and looked at her seriously. "I'm sorry. I should have explained everything to you clearly. I wanted to end the banquet quickly, so I had you deliberately say such cruel things to Princess Anna. I know that's not your true nature. Don't be sad anymore." With that, the emperor held Hill tightly. "This should be enough to coax her, right?" The emperor looked down and found Hill still crying her heart out. The straight man emperor panicked. "Did I do something wrong again?" He didn't know that people cry not only when angry but also when happy. The emperor waited patiently for 2 hours. He asked Hill, "Are you done crying?" Hill nodded proudly. So the emperor picked Hill up. "Then come with me somewhere." Hill asked curiously, "Where to?" The emperor smiled gently, "To clear up the misunderstanding between us." Meanwhile, on the other side of the palace, Princess Anna smashed a vase. Thinking of the humiliating scene during the day made her tremble with anger. Who is that woman? Why doesn't my divine power work on her? She relied on the divine power in the gem to instantly transform from an ordinary person into the continent's most beautiful woman. No one could escape this divine power. But today, the gem failed in front of the queen. Everyone was attracted to the queen while ignoring her. Anna pondered for a long time. She suddenly looked at the fabric beside her. "This is a piece of cloth that fell from the queen." After thinking, she picked up the fabric and began chanting an ancient spell. In a gentle breeze, the fabric quickly disappeared. Anna looked at her empty palm, puzzled. Why is there nothing? Why doesn't divine power work on the queen? Though angry, Anna quickly adjusted her mindset. "It doesn't matter, I can't give up. If I persist, the emperor will be mine sooner or later. Since ancient times, someone else's cake always tastes better." Anna laughed arrogantly, completely unaware that everything she did was clearly seen by Hill and the emperor outside the window. Hill finally understood the princess's true nature. "I was still feeling sad about being too harsh with her, but this person actually wants to steal my husband." Hill turned to the emperor. "Your Majesty, lend me the dragon tomorrow. I want to teach a certain unreasonable person a lesson." Today was the day the queen invited her to the tea party. Anna yelled at her maid, "Isn't there a more gorgeous dress? Bring out the best dress from the bottom of the trunk." Anna gritted her teeth and swore, "I absolutely cannot lose to the queen again this time." After Anna dressed up elaborately, she brought her maid to the queen's palace. The few people who had just come from the countryside were instantly blinded by the gorgeous palace. The queen's palace is indeed the most beautiful place in the entire empire. It seems His Majesty's love for the queen is truly real. Anna secretly swore, "When I become queen, all of this will be mine." While thinking this, a heroic blonde woman's figure appeared ahead. Hill heard the commotion, stroked the huge black dragon, and turned with a smile to greet. "You're here, Princess Anna." The black dragon opened its giant teeth and roared loudly roar. Anna was scared pale and could barely speak. Hill's maid beside her sternly said, "Shut up! You beast, how dare you make noise in front of me!" But Anna was already paralyzed with fear from the giant dragon. She looked in shock as the queen smiled and soothed the giant dragon. "Don't roar, you're scaring the guest." The previously fierce giant dragon immediately became as docile as a little kitten. Hill satisfiedly patted the black dragon's chin. "Good boy. After the black dragon shrank, it obediently prostrated at Hill's feet. Anna trembled all over with fear but still had to pretend to smile. Hill looked at her amusedly. "Where's that attitude from yesterday when you were clamoring to steal my husband?" She seemed to remember something, and said with an evil smile, "Oh right, thank you for the peacocks. This guy really liked them." Princess Anna looked horrified. She actually didn't know that yesterday the black dragon not only didn't eat the peacocks but angrily hugged the beautiful little bird. "You barbarians. You actually want me to eat such a precious bird? What do you take me for?" Hill saw that Anna was indeed scared as expected, and continued with an evil smile saying things that would make her misunderstand. "Dragons really like beautiful things." She grabbed Anna's hand, looking at it this way. "Your fingers are also very beautiful. I suppose losing a few wouldn't matter, right?" Princess Anna was so scared she immediately excused herself and left. Thinking of Anna's panicked escape, Hill found it amusing. But she knew Princess Anna wouldn't easily give up trying to steal his majesty. Hill hugged her pillow somewhat nervously. "Actually, Princess Anna doesn't lose to me in family background, etiquette, or even influence. Perhaps she's more suitable to be queen than me. But even so, I won't give up. His majesty can only be mine. That's truly my honor." The emperor suddenly appeared behind Hill and held his little wife in his arms. He looked at Hill affectionately. "You must hold on tight and never let go." Hill looked back in surprise. "Your Majesty, how did you suddenly appear?" The emperor smiled and hugged Hill. "I thought you were asleep, so I came in quietly." The emperor looked gently at Hill's face. "Recently, my little wife has been so tired from the princess matter that her dark circles have gotten worse." The emperor felt so heartbroken. He touched Hill's face and said seriously, "How about just killing her directly?" Hill looked at the emperor's expression and knew he truly had murderous intent. But Hill didn't want the emperor to be stained with blood anymore. She suddenly smiled and changed the subject. "Your Majesty, I'm so sleepy, I want to sleep." The emperor always doted on his wife. Looking at Hill's drowsy, sleeping face, he didn't continue the topic. Hill originally just wanted to find an excuse to divert the emperor's attention, but after lying down, she really did get sleepy. Thinking of the unfinished words, Hill forced herself to fight off drowsiness and insisted on finishing. "Your Majesty, I'll officially participate in the schedule tomorrow. If I work a little harder, Princess Anna will give up someday. So, Your Majesty, you don't need to kill her." After speaking, Hill really couldn't resist and fell into deep sleep. The emperor looked at his little wife's sleeping face thoughtfully. Hill might never know how warm her words were to someone who had long been numb to life and death. The emperor held Hill tight. "I really wish we could never be apart. This ordinary-looking green tea girl, in order to win against the stunning queen, especially wore the heart-enchanting gem necklace." As soon as she entered the banquet hall, all the men's eyes went straight, and the women also blushed, looking at her. Princess Anna smiled brilliantly at everyone's reactions. "This is the right reaction. With this gem, I am the most beautiful. The last time the queen stole the spotlight must have been an accident." She knew the queen wouldn't attend this kind of banquet, but deliberately asked the noble women with a confused expression, "Why don't I see the queen? Such an excellent and meaningful activity, she would definitely participate, right?" The surrounding ladies suddenly quieted down. The noblewoman hosting the banquet also seemed somewhat embarrassed. "She probably won't come. Who in the empire doesn't know that the queen only attends palace events where his majesty is also present?" But the noblewoman still spoke tactfully. "Perhaps the queen just doesn't like crowds." Anna immediately laughed exaggeratedly. "How could that be? Not long ago, Her Majesty the Queen personally invited me to a tea party." Everyone was amazed. The queen has never invited any noble ladies. Seeing everyone discussing animatedly, Anna smiled with satisfaction. Thinking of how Hill had insulted her with a dragon, Anna decided to get revenge. Sure enough, someone carefully inquired, "How was the tea party?" Anna immediately put on a pitiful expression. "I seem to have made some mistake then. Actually, Her Majesty the Queen came with a dragon." The noblewoman stood up in fright, saying in horror, "I heard that dragon is so vicious it's been locked in an underground dungeon." Anna continued to add fuel to the fire, slandering the queen, "Yes, but out of curiosity, I went closer to look." She made an expression like she was about to cry, but that dragon suddenly tried to bite my hand. The surrounding noblewomen were immediately frightened. Anna cried while apologizing. "Sorry, I was too scared, but the queen is still a good person." The surrounding ladies showed sympathetic expressions and began discussing the queen. "This looks like a threat no matter how you see it." Anna, seeing her goal of slandering the queen achieved, smiled with satisfaction. Unexpectedly, a voice came from behind. "If that's really the case, it seems the queen can already completely control the evil dragon." Anna didn't expect anyone would speak up for the queen. She looked up and recognized this as Eleni, the emperor's childhood friend and the person initially nominated as a queen candidate. Eleni was also secretly sizing up this so-called continent's most beautiful woman. The two women's gazes met, each with their own thoughts. Anna didn't understand. This woman should also want the queen's position, right? Why is she speaking up for the queen? Eleni continued. "You're still alive now. Doesn't this prove the queen never intended to kill you? Moreover, the weak queen you speak of has completely tamed the evil dragon." Everyone suddenly realized That's right. Although the dragon was cruel to Princess Anna, it listened to the queen very well. I heard dragons are close to divine beings and normally cannot be controlled by humans. The queen can actually control such a fierce beast. Anna angrily turned to look, recognizing the emperor's childhood friend Eleni. She should also like the emperor. Why is she speaking up for the queen? Seeing the discussion going in the wrong direction, Anna quickly changed her story. It wasn't the queen who controlled it. It was her maid who subdued the dragon. Eleni sipped her tea and delivered another blow unhurriedly. I heard that maid is the daughter of a border count, inheriting her mother's super strong abilities. But such a girl willingly entered the palace to be the queen's maid. How interesting. After hearing this, everyone admired the queen even more. To be able to win over such a powerful maid, Her Majesty the Queen is truly remarkable. Anna could no longer pretend and completely darkened her face. Eleni looked at the green tea's expression with disdain. Even if it's insulting the queen, it should be me doing it. What are you? Saying this, Eleni suddenly noticed the gem necklace on Bitch's neck and walked over to question. What is that? Bitch was startled and about to dodge when suddenly came the announcement of the queen's arrival. Under everyone's gaze, Queen Hill walked in wearing an exquisite little dress. Everyone was instantly attracted by the queen's beauty. Even the women couldn't help but look at the queen enviously. Such a beauty. No wonder His Majesty is so infatuated. Everyone enthusiastically surrounded the queen to talk. Anna looked at the scene in disbelief. Once again, people ignored her. In their eyes, there was only the queen. No one was looking at her at all. Hill smiled and greeted everyone. I was just passing by, so I came in. I hope I'm not disturbing you? The noblewoman hosting the banquet was both excited and nervous. How could that be? Having you participate in our activity is truly an honor. Hill then quietly listened to the speech on stage. Although she looked very focused, her thoughts had already drifted beyond the galaxy. If it weren't for stopping the scheming princess from causing trouble everywhere, she wouldn't want to come to such a boring meeting. Finally hearing the speech, on stage end, Hill sighed with relief. Finally can rest a bit. Unexpectedly, the scheming princess came over to cause trouble again. She walked over and modestly struck up a conversation with Hill. The empire is truly remarkable. The level of presentations is so high. Hill glanced back at her and responded blandly. I'm happy that the princess is satisfied. But such pleasantries were obviously not enough to drive away the scheming princess. She smiled again and used an innocent tone to mock the queen. Oh my, is this your first time attending? What a pity. If I were the queen, I would probably attend such activities often. Before Hill could retort, Eleni appeared again, coming from the countryside. You must be amazed seeing everything in the empire, right? I hope you can take this opportunity to learn more. The princess's face darkened with anger. Miss Eleni, how can you say such rude things? The named woman looked at the princess coldly. Rude? Since you mentioned rudeness, let me add one more thing. According to imperial law, one must not speak to Her Majesty the Queen first without the queen's permission. The scheming princess was left speechless. What's wrong with this woman? We're all the queen's rivals. Why is she being so arrogant? At this moment, scheming princess suddenly noticed that Queen Hill was looking at Eleni like a fangirl. The princess trembled with anger, feeling betrayed. Are these two people ganging up to bully me? Hill didn't care about the princess's expression. She was now completely attracted to Eleni. This young lady was not only elegant in manner and proper in etiquette, but more importantly, she also knew the art of indirect sarcasm. Hill looked at the young lady with growing fondness, feeling she could definitely become close friends with her. This white-haired man remained elegant even when bound by 13 iron chains. He smiled and negotiated with the cruel emperor. You already got the dragon, can't you let me go? The emperor only coldly looked down at him. But didn't all this chaos start because of you? Although the white-haired man was still smiling, he was already panicking inside. He could feel the powerful, oppressive aura from the Yusandif blood within the emperor. Under the emperor's terrifying presence, the white-haired man quickly smiled and changed the subject. I know the reason you haven't killed me is because of your wife Hill. After hearing this, the emperor suddenly frowned. This guy still dares to target Hill? He suddenly drew his black sword, ready to cut down this chatterbox. But the white-haired man continued, Aren't you curious how the queen summoned the dragon? The emperor indeed stopped swinging his sword, staring deadly at the white-haired man. Although the white-haired man looked calm just now, he was actually very nervous inside. He knew that the emperor with Yusandif blood was moody and really might kill him. This miraculous blood came from an ancient family called Yusandif. They possessed both magic and divine power, powerful enough to be above all humans. Mixing the blood of the strongest members of this clan together created Yusandif blood. Years ago, the former emperor, to create powerful warriors, found many test subjects to be vessels for this blood, but all failed. The last test subject was the emperor's weak youngest son. Everyone thought it wouldn't succeed, but only the little prince survived, though he completely became a bloodthirsty monster, taking 8 years to gradually recover and become the current emperor. The white-haired man knew the emperor's background clearly. Seeing that he indeed didn't swing his sword because of his words, he smiled even more brilliantly. Ordinary people who touch a phantom beast egg can at most hatch a fire salamander, but the queen summoned a dragon. He looked intently at the emperor. What exactly is the queen's identity? Are you really not curious at all? Is her becoming your queen really just a coincidence? The emperor fell silent facing these two questions. He remembered that from the first moment he saw Hill, he had involuntarily fallen in love with her. Whether it was her crying or her happy expressions, he liked them all. And he didn't know when he had developed deep trust in her, never doubting a single word she said. Seeing the emperor waver, the white-haired man added fuel to the fire. You're curious too, right? Release me, and I'll help you investigate her. Don't worry, I won't kill her. The emperor suddenly darkened and raised his long sword to strike. The white-haired man quickly begged for mercy. Fortunately, at the last moment, a guard's announcement interrupted the emperor's action. The guard captain respectfully reported, "The people you sent out have returned." The emperor stopped and turned to ask, "Did they bring back all the maids?" Unexpectedly, the guard captain's expression became very troubled. The emperor was puzzled. What, they didn't want to come? The guard captain quickly explained, "No, according to reports, there haven't been any maids in that separate palace for the past few years." The emperor's expression changed instantly. How is this possible? Hill clearly told me that maids in the empty separate palace raised me. Without them, I might not have survived at all. They even made me a fruit tower with leftover fruit from the main palace on my 10th birthday. When the emperor heard her say this, he asked for the maids' names, thinking of bringing such loyal maids to the queen's palace to continue serving Hill. But Hill suddenly showed a confused expression. What are their names? I can't remember them. This is impossible. At the time, the emperor didn't continue asking, just secretly sent people to the separate palace where Hill lived before marriage to find those 3 maids. He didn't expect this result. Hill, who exactly are you? That evening, the emperor returned from his study, and attendants led him directly toward the queen's palace. The emperor suddenly stopped. Why are we going this way? The attendant immediately became nervous. Aren't you going to rest in the queen's palace? The emperor suddenly turned cold. When did I say I was going to the queen's palace? Go back to my chambers. He turned and left. The servants behind him were shocked. His Majesty used to go to the queen's palace every day. What's wrong? Back in his chambers, the emperor sat alone in his chair. Suddenly, as if someone emerged from the darkness whispering in his ear, "Kill her!" More and more voices surrounded the emperor. "Kill her! Kill them all!" The monster blood in the emperor's body began to stir restlessly. The disappointment and pain of betrayal made him have murderous thoughts again. Originally, from their wedding day, these voices had disappeared. Hill had given him brief respite with her beauty and kindness, but thinking of what the white-haired man said, the emperor couldn't help but ponder. Who exactly is Hill? Did someone deliberately arrange for her to be by my side? At this moment, Hill didn't know the emperor had begun to suspect her. She was happily waiting for the emperor in the queen's palace. She couldn't wait to share the good news of making a new friend with her husband, that Eleni is polite and sharp-tongued. Being friends with her would definitely be great. I really hope His Majesty comes quickly so I can tell him. Hill lay on the bed, happily imagining her upcoming conversation with His Majesty. She didn't know that a crack had already appeared in their relationship.